I'm Scott Al Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua, but today I'm in Managua, where it is so hot and humid I can barely keep the camera from steaming over, or my glasses. I've been working at this for about 10 minutes and it's still steaming up being outside. Today I'm going to talk about a couple economic concepts. Both of these came up on my channel independently, and both of them I think are pretty important, so I'm going to put them together in today's video. The first, or the one we're going to do second, is the idea that the American economy has already collapsed. I mentioned this casually in another video, assuming people are keeping up with economic news, but for those who haven't, I'm going to go into a little bit because one of my regular viewers mentioned, whoa, I haven't heard this before, and so I want to dig in a little bit into what this economic theory is and why it has some legs and why it may matter to you. Also, the other is there's a bit of comment on my tariff talk, and not about the tariffs themselves, but they were saying that it is a near certainty or a very high likelihood that we expect when the United States, or any country, but in this particular example, when the United States enacts tariffs to damage the Nicaraguan economy, that there will be a socioeconomic backlash on the streets, which is completely unprecedented and I think absolutely the antithesis of the Nicaraguan experience, but a standard bit of FUD we hear from the United States. So I want to dig into a little bit about that and explain why. Primarily, that is not something we expect at all, and completely the opposite of where your brain should go when this is going to happen. So we're going to talk about those right after the bump. If you're wondering where I am today, I'm at the beautiful Hotel Los Robles in Los Robles, downtown Managua, and this is a kind of garden oasis and French restaurant in the middle of the city, in the middle of the party district. So sometimes you will still hear, even though it's morning, parties going on the street. It's pretty wild out here, and there's a bit of traffic because Avenida Los Robles is directly behind me. This is my private little balcony space. Here, I can show you real quickly. I have a little cafe table there. There's a restaurant here that does the best French food in the city, so definitely come check them out. This is a great place. We were using this a lot when we first moved here. I haven't been here in a little while. They've added a bunch of stuff in the back. They have a big pool, which they had previously. They have a beautiful indoor garden, and they're the only restaurant I know that serves escargot in the city, so definitely a place to check out. And Jillian, who is French from the channel, has been here and says that the escargot is definitely on point. I've had it. I believe it's on point, but my opinion is versus escargot I've had primarily in the United States. I don't have a large scope of French experience with that. I have eaten in France, but not extensively. All right, so let's get to that first point. Let's talk about what is happening real quick. So if you didn't see my other video or not following the news, the United States is threatening to go to 100% tariffs on Nicaragua and to eject it from CAFTA. Now, those are overlapping. The first sign that you know that this is really FUD even at the government level, one, going to 100% tariffs, just going to harm the U.S., but the U.S. has shown it is completely willing to harm the U.S. if it changes American public opinion, so they're completely up for manipulating the American people. So we have to expect that that could happen no matter how economically foolish it would be to cut off food supply, because that's what Nicaragua primarily provides to the United States and most of the world, right? Yes, they provide a lot of textiles, and they do some mining, and they have some, miscellaneous things, but agricultural output is our big export, right? Now, a lot of it's luxury, coffee, tobacco, chocolate, and that stuff would go up in price, but that stuff's going up in price anyway, so that stuff tends not to be too impacted by tariffs, especially as much of the processing is done outside the country, so the price is only on the raw goods. The tariff is only on the raw goods, so you don't really see that 100% increase in prices because it's not really a tariff on the full thing. If you're getting a candy bar, for example, maybe only 10% of that is raw chocolate. The other 90% is processing, packaging, shipping, advertising, profit, and so forth. So you're not going to see prices double, but you will see them increase. The other things, though, the corn, the soy, the peanuts, the sugar, all those things, those will see big increases. And those are the things that America needs to feed itself, and that's where people are starting to panic that the agricultural system and food supply is starting to collapse in the United States, which is clearly an intent for whatever reason. So there is every real possibility that we should expect that the United States will do this and simply push the U.S. to have much more expensive food or a lack thereof. And will Nicaragua continue to ship food to the United States if it's not wanted? Maybe not. There are other places that want the food, and we talked about that. So that's what's going on, is this threat, and very real one, of 100% tariffs, and the redundant threat of kicking Nicaragua out of CAFTA, which of course going to the tariff and kicking them out is the same thing, right? CAFTA is just the thing that says you can't have tariffs. So it's not quite that simple, but that's basically the system. Now, Nicaragua has a tariff-free agreement with much of the world, not most of the world, but a large portion of it, and those things will all stay in place. It's only the United States that is potentially impacted by this, but the U.S. is the primary trading partner currently with Nicaragua. What's interesting is the seeming desire of the United States to stop being a primary place that's able to buy low-cost, high-quality Nicaraguan goods. So why do they want to do that? That's for you to decide in the United States, but that's what we're seeing going on here. But there is a lot of demand for Nicaraguan products because they're agricultural, and so in the long run, we don't really see this as a threat to Nicaragua in much. But in the short term, would it be painful? And does it make for a nice news cycle? It does. And so the concern from the person who posted in the group is that when we see things like this done, you expect to see blowback on the streets. You expect to see Americans and those perceived as Americans to be discriminated against on the streets, whether by individual people who are simply mad at America and so lash out at Americans, or by the government who wants to punish America for doing what it has done. Now, that on the surface makes sense, and that's a news cycle that they say in the United States. This is, so let's be real clear, this is a commonly repeated, and you know, we're not saying the person who's saying it is trying to do this. We're saying that people will hear this from the propaganda machine attempting to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt for Americans moving abroad. And so that could be one of the reasons that they're looking at doing these tariffs, is trying to find ways to make friendly nations seem less friendly, to create this, oh sure, okay, you've convinced people that they're safe and nice now, but we're doing something and they're going to be angry at us, so they won't continue to be, right? That all it takes is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. None of those things have to be true for them to be effective. And so there's always this powerful manipulation of the American public and other people, right, of course, to make them fearful. Americans are already a very fearful people. It is the defining characteristic of the American experience. The world knows the thing that you can tell makes people more American than anything is this overwhelming sense of fear of everything. And you know it. Watch memes. We all know it's true. People who pretend to be tough guys are afraid of cities, right? Like, the fear factor is so great in every aspect of life. People are afraid of who uses a bathroom. People are afraid of going to school. People are afraid of letting their kids play on the street. People are afraid of driving. People are afraid of cities. They're afraid of the country. Everybody's afraid, right? It is the one common factor. So it becomes a very manipulative power tool to use in the United States especially, but anywhere it's effective, but the United States especially, to simply make people have doubts about the future. And when you're talking about life changes, like moving to a new country, you're already in a situation where you have lots of unknowns. Humans naturally feel fear and uncertainty. So all you have to do is introduce a little bit more, and they start to no longer believe the information that they have at hand, the useful information. So you say, Nicaragua's safe, Nicaragua's welcoming. They say, well, first of all, they spent decades trying to convince you that that wasn't true. That is starting to have holes in the chinks in the armor, right? People are starting to realize that Nicaragua is safe and welcoming. So now they can't deny that anymore. They can't realistically stop people from understanding that. So they have to move to, we're going to make it not safe or not welcoming in the future, and here's why you should expect that, right? That's what's going on. That is the root of this fear, is this, we failed at lying about what it is, so we're going to lie about what it will be. Okay, so that's the root. So why won't it do that, right? Because on the surface, this feels logical. Well, we treat them badly, they're going to treat us badly. Well, maybe, but let's be clear. Only Americans broadly see people as representatives of the country they are born in. This is not a normal thing around the world. Nicaraguans don't see Americans living in Nicaragua as representatives of the American empire. That is not the view. If anything, they see them as refugees or victims of the empire, the same as themselves, with some additional complications. Right? But they do not look automatically at a person who comes from a place as being a representative of it any more than we see a Nicaraguan who's in the United States trying to find work as being some kind of representative of their country. That's not really what's going on. They've left their country, maybe just because they need work, maybe because they don't like it there, maybe because they don't feel represented there, whatever reason. But we don't look at them as being a representative necessarily. They could be, but that's not the expected norm. So this is not a logical conclusion to think that because someone is an American in this case, living in a country that is very different from the US. If we were living in a country very much like the US, you could have a different discussion. But because Americans like me have moved to a country that is essentially the polar opposite of the United States in every conceivable way, like there's very few places that you could reasonably come up with as being more different where you're not leaning on differences in like language or religion in order to create the differences. But when it comes to ideological difference, behavior difference, sorry, it is so humid out here today. And you're really looking at about as different as it could possibly be. So in that situation, looking at these people who said, this lifestyle, this behavior is not what I'm looking for. I want the opposite. You don't look at them and go, you're representing the thing that you left. No, they say, you're so passionate about how we are that you've come and changed your life to be a part of our experience. Right? That's much more the logical way to look at it. And outside the US, that is generally how people do look at it. And so to have this idea that they're going to be angry at those of us who are also victims of these tariffs, those of us who are also fleeing this behavior, and saying, you're a victim, we're angry at you. That is completely illogical and weird. And this entire FUD tactic is only going to be effective, I believe, to Americans or a very small subset of the world. Most of the world would be like, this doesn't make any sense. How did you come to this conclusion from these facts, right? But if you're coming from the United States, it's going to feel absolutely normal because it's how Americans or America tends to behave, right? They lash out at the people of a country rather than at the country. They lash out at who they can get at out of anger, not out of trying to enact some kind of change. So that's on the street, right? Because, and the person who posted this says, just look at economists. They're saying this. Well, economists are not social analysts, right? So the first thing is that no matter what the economic impact is, this is a social question, right? Would the social framework of the country fundamentally change? Would the behavior of the belief system of the people fundamentally change because the U.S. puts a somewhat higher tariff on goods going to one trading partner? There's already a tariff, and they're already mistreated by the U.S. And historically, over the last, say, 100 years, we're actually at one of the time periods where we're being treated the best by the U.S. That's a horrible situation. But if you look in the 70 years of occupation, the 10 or 12 additional years of war, the additional 12 years or so of having managed to get a puppet onto the government, we're actually in a time period where Nicaragua is doing the best. It's most sovereign. It is being harassed the least by the U.S., not maybe intentionally, but effectively. Right? The U.S. is having its least ability to impact Nicaragua during this time. So if we didn't have this behavior happen over the last 100 years when things were more dramatic, why would we think it could happen now when things are less dramatic? That is absolutely the opposite of what that would imply. So that doesn't make sense to me as a concept. And looking at economists, what would an economist know? That is the wrong field to be asking this question. But let's look at the economics as well. So obviously the United States is attempting to harm the economics of the country. Nicaragua is currently the strongest economy in Latin America. It is by far the strongest in the region. It's doing incredibly well. The United States is kind of middling on the charts at this point. And so, of course, there's this, we can't let Nicaragua look so good. So the U.S. is trying to find ways to lower that, and they probably can. They're a huge country. They have a lot of weight to throw around, and they're going to throw some of it at Nicaragua if they can remember to do so. That's also part of their problem. They tend to be a little bit fickle because there's no intelligent person driving the wheels, and so they kind of get distracted, right, at every level. So when you're looking at this economically, yes, Nicaragua would be potentially harmed. But as we talked about in the tariff video, there's a lot of different ways that they can mitigate this. They won't be immediate, but over time, this is not expected to be a really big hit. And we don't expect the United States to, one, necessarily even get these tariffs through because they're struggling to do that, and two, not be able to maintain them long term because they make no sense and only harm the American people. Because remember, a tariff is a tax on the American people. We don't pay that here. So we only potentially see an impact in a lowering level of orders of products coming from the U.S., right? The U.S. will purchase less from Nicaragua, but they're not going to pay less for it. They're going to pay the same. Maybe more. Maybe Nicaragua will raise the prices, but Nicaragua will simply look for other outlets, and they now have them. So it just takes time to shift to them is all. And that's what we expect to see happen. But in the short term, there could be an economic impact. Absolutely. So what would be the response? Well, the theory in this FUD propaganda concept is that the response would be to not just be harmed economically, but then to bow down to the US and harm themselves intentionally economically further by alienating, kicking out, or somehow harming the foreign investors who are here trying to help. This is economically the most crazy thing you could imagine, right? Let's go after the remaining source of revenue, especially the one that hits the US the hardest, and go after it rather than trying to help ourselves. The logical reaction that an economist should be predicting is that Nicaragua would do everything it can to encourage things to offset the damage done by the tariffs, the potential damage done by the tariffs. That's the logical thing. And looking historically at Nicaragua, they tend to be a very logical country. So again, this theory that this economic flailing will happen is based on the concept that the country is foolish and not economically wise. So you have to think that this must be a tool being used in a country where that is the norm, where you can expect the people in power not to be economically savvy, right? But that is demonstrably not the case historically in Nicaragua. So this doesn't make a lot of sense to apply here. A socioeconomic analysis here should give you very much the opposite. But even if they're just mildly logical, the obvious thing is they want to do what they can to slow the loss or even continue to increase the economy. And an important source of being able to do that is foreigners who move into the country and provide a revenue stream, and foreigners who move into the country or don't move into the country but invest in the country because they have faith in it. Both of those things depend on those foreigners feeling confident that they can come here and invest and or live best both. So anything that would undermine that would also impact the economy. The exact last thing you want to do at a moment where you're already being hit with economic impact. So this is the last thing we would expect to have happen. If anything, we would expect the treatment of Americans on the street to get better, both at a government level and potentially at a socioeconomic level. One, because people feel more sorry for us. We're now more in a sense of camaraderie. We're all victims in this together. We're all on the same side. But also because obviously it is an important collaboration between the Americans who live here and the Nicaraguan people to help keep the economy as strong as we can. And so the expected reaction is absolutely not that you should be fearful that suddenly Nicaragua is going to change into a different country, that it's going to act like America, that it's going to become irrational, and it's going to harm itself just to lash out at you who are randomly not responsible. It's kind of like you're walking down the street and someone attacks you and you get beat up, and then you randomly pick another person, and because you're angry that you got beat up, you beat them up. And they might beat you up again in return. Right? You have nothing to gain by beating up an innocent bystander. But that's the theory that's being promoted, of course, in the US, trying to create this fear that the innocent bystanders or the people who are also co-victims are going to be lashing out at each other. It's not the logical response. It is not the expected response. And historically, we can see it has not been the response over a very long period of time. It goes against the cultural and logical norms of the country. So it's not something that I think you need to be afraid of. Of course, can wild random things happen? Can the world change? Can countries become with different personality, right? National personalities? Yes, that can happen. But rarely does it happen quickly, and almost never does it flip so dramatically. So I don't think that this is even a fear worth mentioning. It's so off the wall and completely the antithesis of the expected behavior that I don't think it really makes sense to go down. So now let's talk about what's going on in the United States. So the theory goes a little bit something like this. There are known bubbles over time. There was the housing bubble, there was the dot-com bubble, and these things created massive growth in the economy in the United States. And when they popped, massive economic contraction, right? And we recognize these as bubbles. It's so humid. I'm so like dripping with sweat. I tried to dry it out and I couldn't do it. And these create these giant bubbles, right? And so when we look, we see these growths and then these drop-offs. And then we discover what the economy was actually like at the end, because the way that we measure economy, especially in the United States with GDP, things like blind investment actually count towards the gross domestic product, even if we're simply spending on things that don't exist. So during the dot-com era, billions, trillions of dollars was spent purchasing shares of companies that in some cases never existed, in some cases were overinflated, had products that would never hit the market, and so forth. It became this joke, basically, that we had this constant supply of complete garbage that people were investing in. And a few of those things did turn into something, but by and large, they did not. Most of those companies simply evaporated, and with it, all the wealth that was put into them. But on paper, everything looked like it was really big. Everyone became paper millionaires, or paper billionaires in the United States during this time. It was you get caught up in the excitement. You put all your money into this thing, you see it going up, and until someone cashes out and actually has that money, you don't actually know if it's real. And what most people found out is that most of it wasn't real, and so it simply evaporated. So we have to kind of look past this bubble and look at the lines to see what the economy actually was under the surface, because GDP is not the actual economy. We talk about this a lot. Two people can just pass money back and forth and create GDP, even though nothing's been created. And I saw a great meme the other day. Two economists are walking down the street, and one sees a pile of dog do and says, "Hey, I'll pay $100 to eat that dog do." And the other's like, "Well, $100, yeah," and he eats it. And they're walking down a little bit farther, and the one who ate it sees some more dog do. He's like, "Hey, I'll pay you $100 to eat that dog do." And so that guy's like, "Yeah, $100, totally worth it." So he eats it, right? And at the end, they look at each other, and the one says, "I feel like we may have not accomplished anything today except for eating dog do." Because remember, the money passed back and forth. They both started with the same money that they started with, but they both ended up eating dog do on the way. And the second one says, "Well, no, we did accomplish something. We grew the GDP by $200. And that's how the GDP measurement works. Even if nothing's accomplished, simply moving money back and forth between two people grows the economy by the amount of the transaction, not by the amount of actual growth. So this makes it a very dangerous tool to use if we're not careful. And things like investing in things that are going to fail cause economic growth by GDP measurement when they actually are creating economic contraction when we look at the actual economy, the actual ability to hire and pay and produce goods or products or ideas. And so we have to be very careful that during bubbles we'll see this propping up that makes the economy look like it's doing very well, when in fact it may be doing really poorly. So what is going on now? Well, we're looking at the largest bubble that there has ever been, the AI bubble. We know that, one, it's not really AI, it's mostly LLMs, but that's a different discussion. But we have a number of multi-trillion-dollar companies. Some of the largest companies in world history are based off of wild speculation in their value, and none of them have produced any profits ever. And so we have an entire industry where multi-trillion-dollar companies are being created with no actual known value. We don't even know if they can be profitable. That's important. And they are using trillions of dollars of resources from companies, for example, like Microsoft's Azure and Amazon's AWS. They're pouring outrageous amounts of money into those. They're also building their own data centers. So the data center industry is exploding, providing resources of potentially negative value. And this, all of this moving money around and doing things is creating a bubble, is creating GDP. So we're seeing the S&P 500 going up. We're seeing all these things increase. But what we aren't seeing is an increased output of capacity. We're not seeing growth on the ground in the United States. But here's the fear. We know that a lot of terrible things are happening with the economy. We know that people are struggling to find work. Companies are struggling to find employees. Cost of living is going up. Salaries are not going up to match it. The quality of life is decreasing rapidly in the United States. Everyone feels it. Everyone's freaking out about it. And yet, on paper, it seems like things are okay. This is the AI bubble. The question is, when we take the bubble away, when it pops, are we left with an economy that was tracking roughly as it was expected to before the bubble started, or has the economy actually tanked and it's being hidden by the bubble? The economic theory that I was speaking of, that I saw some good research on, suggests that we actually have strong evidence that the American economy has collapsed. It is actually crushed. It is actually in an unrecoverable spiral. It is actually in a devastating moment in history. But because of the AI bubble, we're able to hide that temporarily and for a few more years, most likely. But people are feeling it on the ground. If we were truly in a real economic growth like that the charts suggest, no one should be having these problems. There should be so many jobs that no one has to worry. Salaries should be increasing like crazy. No one should have to worry. That is not what we're seeing on the ground. And so that tells us that because we're seeing that number go up on paper and we're seeing things collapse, by observation nationwide, that we have the possibility of there being low economic growth, stagnation, or the very real possibility of collapse being hidden by the AI. And because the AI bubble is hiding whatever situation is actually going on, we aren't reacting to it appropriately. So if there really is a collapse underway, we're not going around and trying to prop up the economy with solid economic principles. Instead, we're riding high on this, just trade on this vaporware of AI, which may turn into something. There may be value in the future, but right now, no one has figured out what that value is. And if we're losing money now, and they're already saying that in many cases they believe we may have reached nearly or possibly already surpassed the apex of AI capability, as slop is beginning to feed the slop and the quality is decreasing of many different aspects of AI, we may be in a position where it's at its most close to profitable now and only going to move farther away from it in the future. Over time, I suspect that computing power will become more powerful, more prevalent, and cheaper, that eventually the type of AI that we're using today won't continue to be out of financial reach of profitability. However, we don't know how far away that's going to be and what that's going to look like. For now, it's reasonably out of reach of profitability. So, this is an incredibly dangerous moment for the economy. We have never really been in a situation where the growth, the bubble was so fantastic that it could hide something so terrible under the hood, where we've also had indicators that something so terrible under the hood is happening. We may have already, and the theory is we have definitely already gone through a collapse greater than the 1929 market collapse going into the Great Depression. But unlike that one where we knew it had happened as it happened, now it's happening and continuing to happen, and no safeties are being put into place, no corrective measures are being put into place, both because it is hidden from us and because it seems like this may be an intentional collapse, because intentional collapses are a tool of politicians. So we have to be careful with that. And so that is where we may be, and the economic numbers certainly don't prove this, but certainly give us reason to consider it a possibility and something you need to be aware of, right? So if you're in the United States or you're looking at investing in the United States and you're like, things are doing great, look on paper, and you're one of those people who just tracks on paper, remember, you have to understand what's behind those numbers, right? Just tracking on paper as a day trader generally works. But if you're going to be an investor, you have to understand what's really profitable, what's really sustainable, what is being driven by the traders instead of the investors. And traders know that they can make money when things are going up or going down. They don't really care if the economy is strong or not. They only care that it's volatile. Investors need the economy to go up. They need success for the people. And so that is where traders may drive the system into the ground because they're still making their money, but the investors are the ones who are funding that. So we don't want to see that happen. In a healthy system, both traders and investors are seeing gains, right? If done well, there's always losers in the system, especially with traders. With investors, you can have all winners in theory. Never really happens, but in theory, it can happen. With traders, every trader who earns has to come at the cost of one who loses. This is why we talk about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Everyone who says that there's this future in it, that you can make money in it, it's a zero-sum game. Every penny that someone has ever claimed to have made, they're claiming they took from someone as a loss. So on average, it's a loss because there's overhead to doing the trading. It's not a zero overhead system. So whatever comes off the top then is just money being shuffled around between people. It's kind of like gambling. There isn't actually economic growth being created through gambling. It's simply someone collecting some overhead and then groups of people shuffling money back and forth. The problem is in gambling, the overhead's huge, and in something like Bitcoin, the overhead is trivial, but it's still the same essential mechanism. There's no additional value being created by the system. And so that's how trading works. That's why it's trading, not investing. Whereas if you're investing in a business that's actually making cars or chairs, they're actually creating something. More is existing in the universe when they're done. And so they have the potential to actually create value, maybe a small amount, maybe a huge amount. They're creating something. With AI, the question is it creating something? Is there any way to measure that it's creating something, or is it actually subtracting value? And many people argue that even at a loss, the output of the AI may be subtracting value in some cases. It may be adding in others, but there's a question there of whether it's a positive or a negative net outcome, even after all of its investment is considered. So we have a lot of risks in the current economic system. And with that bubble, those risks, whatever they are, real, imagined, possible, happening, they're hidden and we aren't sure how to react to them because we can't measure them and really understand what they are. So that's the panic, right? We may already see the greatest economic collapse in American history without knowing it, and we're just waiting for the bubble to pop, and then we're going to have to go through potentially not just the popping of a bubble, which is painful enough, and the largest bubble we've ever had, which would make it even more painful, but then to discover that underneath it is not a healthy economy that's just what it was a few years before, but maybe a fraction of what it was before, and in a free fall that we may not be prepared to pull it out of. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. Buy it quick before the economy collapses and you can't afford coffee anymore. Just kidding. Sort of. But it does help pay for all the things we do here. And of course, hit that like button, get in the show notes, and look for a way to send in a video of yourself so you can be on the show. Get in the comments, say hello, ask a question there, and I will see all of you tomorrow.